Welcome to the Wrestling Realm Presents Championship Culture. I'm Brandon the Guy, and remember, every bout has a story. Now, before we dive into today's content, just want to remind you of a few quick things. Did you know that you can watch all of the Wrestling Realm content anytime just by going to youtube.com/The Wrestling Realm? Don't forget, every Wednesday night, you can always check out The Real Dwayne Allen, Brian H. Waters, Hash the Third, and myself as we talk about all things professional wrestling. Don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms, on Twitter and on Facebook at The Wrestling Realm. Always like and subscribe so that way you never miss a chance when we go live so you can engage in the conversation. You can also stream on any way that you stream anything, and you can always follow us on The Wrestling Realm on Twitch at The Wrestling Realm. So today, as you can see for the title card, X marks the spot. From the beginning, or from then to now, the one thing that's been constant in TNA, GFW, and Impact has always been the X Division. The X Division Championship has had 8 different variations, and when I say constant, at one point they changed it from the knockouts to the women, then they went back to knockouts for their main title. Yes, it's always been a world champion, but remember at TNA's first iteration, it was the NWA World Champion was their biggest world champion. And granted, yes, they had an NWA TNA X Division champion, but remember, it was still the X Division champion. It was always there from the starting to now. So today, I want to take a dive and tell you the story behind why I have all 8 versions of the belt and what the belt means to me. So let's take a look at the original. So you can't look at this belt and not think AJ Styles. From being the first champion to being the person that, to me, when you look at this belt, I always remind myself because AJ Styles is a legend, an icon, whatever you want to call it when it comes to TNA. You can't mention TNA without mentioning AJ Styles. You can't mention X Division without mentioning AJ. So when I started my belt quest to collect all my belts, it was funny because this was one of the first belts and I consider this the AJ belt. So it is crazy because he held it and he kept default getting it. And it seemed like, if the storyline was getting a little stale, he would jump in. But it's crazy, when they first started, it was short title reigns. It was like 40 days, 49 days, so many days at first. And what is it until Chris Sabin held it for like 100 days. Then Petey Williams held it for like 150 odd days. And then this belt main evented a pay-per-view, and I remember it being AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe. And if you ever get a chance to go back and watch a match, go watch the X Division match because those guys did not disappoint. And at the time, it was always, the X Division had no limits, no class, no weight. It was just, no limits. It was a division unlike the cruiserweights that you had to be 220 pounds under, or like 205 live where you were under 205 pounds. It was a no limits. Anybody could contend for this belt, and they put on some, when I say awesome matches, they put on some matches that you would actually say are classics in TNA. I love the belt. I love the design. It was very simple. It drew your eye right to the X. And even though I consider this the AJ belt, I had Chris Sabin sign it because he was one of the staple people to have it. And when I had the opportunity to meet the Motor City Machine Guns, once I had the belt, I always wanted to get their signature on it. Unfortunately, it's signed right across the front. You can see that gray mark. That's actually Chris Sabin's signature. So let's take a look at the second version of this belt. So as you saw in the pictures, they kept the standard X in the middle, but now they put division right through the middle and then champion. So there's no missing the fact that this was a TNA X Division champion. I loved it because of the gold and the silver plating on it. It just stood out on camera. The belt always looked amazing. Now, there was a dark time to me when this belt, and I don't know why TNA they did this a couple times where one person had to hold all the belts. I think it devalued it. Yeah, the storyline was okay with Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle. And yes, I might get flack because Kurt Angle is one of the greatest. Samoa Joe is one of the greatest. But did they need all the belts in that storyline? Because that rivalry was epic. And I love the rivalry. But when I looked at this belt, it always reminds me of giving other guys a chance. This is when Alex Shelley first held the belt. And it felt like Alex Shelley was the last, besides him and Sanjay, were the last two within that era or that breed of TNA originals that didn't hold this belt. You had the Petey Williams, you had the Chris Sabin, you had the Eric Young, you had so many players holding it, and then it was like when Alex Shelley finally got it, it was like instant gratification, like yes, he finally got the belt that eluded him because everybody else around him was getting it. And Alex Shelley was still a top player. Going back to when MCW, I'm gonna call it the black, red, and yellow days, because now their logo is more black and blue. But back in the day when they used to have TNA people regularly, Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley were staples. They used to wrestle Ruckus and Derek Frazier all the time, and I remember the MCW Cruiserweight belt changing between those four men almost every month, and then to go watch them on TV and still not miss a beat. That's why it was special when Alex Shelley won it. So when I started my belt collection, this is one of the belts I said, gotta have it. It even gave a time when people like Doug Williams, Jay Lethal as Black Machismo, and Jay Lethal as his regular self to hold this belt. You got to see Amazing Red really come to his own. Yes, he was the youngest champion at 21 with the first version, but then he came back as more defined person of himself. His character was more fleshed out, and then we got to see things like Robbie, which many people may have forgot. And it's crazy because people may not even remember Brian Kendricks held this belt, Zema Ion, and even RVD. So this belt has some lineage to it, and it has some heavy hitters with it, but it also established a lot of people as main event players within the X Division that you were going to focus on this. Even though you had the things going on with the world champion, it was some people that made you pay attention to this. So now let's move on to arguably one of the most controversial belts in the X Division. So the reason I call this controversial is because, I don't know if you pay attention, but when this belt was first made, it kind of got a lot of flack. And I remember seeing it and they said, oh, they took the IC title design and just slapped the X through the middle. And you can't lie, it kind of does look like they took the whole IC and just put it in the middle. The thing about this belt that really made me pay attention to the division at the time was Austin Aries. I consider this the Austin Aries belt because he was just on another level at the time. This is before he was his reign as Impact World Champion. But if you go back and watch anything that Austin Aries did, most of his hits were with this belt. Now, to be honest with you, I'm okay with a color change belt. When they change paint, when they change it up, it just gives it a fresh look. Sometimes it might be because of legal reasons. Sometimes it might be just because we want to do something different. Yeah, the belt itself, not the strap. I'm just saying, I'm okay with a color swap every once in a while. I love it even more when a wrestler does it, like the TNT title, how they just change it depending upon the wrestler. But when it comes to plates, They changed this, and I think it was a weird time in TNA, but they changed it from blue to green, and this was during another weird era where they gave all the belts to Bobby Lashley. I'm not taking anything away from Bobby Lashley, but that storyline just to me felt like I don't want to say a rinse and repeat, but okay, yeah, he's going to get all the titles again. But when I look at this belt actually was during a time when Impact was rebuilding, trying to reestablish itself, and they had stars that were making a name for themselves within TV. And the story behind this belt is, this is when I start paying attention to Trevor Lee, as he's known in TNA. Now, Trevor Lee, Eddie Edwards, even when they had a match, you paid attention to them no matter who they were wrestling. And then Trevor Lee, I think he held his belt 3 times while he was there, and it just kept going and going and going, and you're like, wow, this guy's actually really good. Even to the point, I see what Triple H saw in him, and he yanked him to NXT because he was trying to build him into a WWE superstar, and I'm glad he is on SmackDown now. But to appreciate Trevor Lee, go back and watch him during this era of the belt. It will not, when I say it will not disappoint, and you will be utterly satisfied when the last person that didn't held the X Division during the TNA originals, as I'm calling them, back when it was like the P.D. Williams, Chris Sabin, the Alex Shelley, was Sanjay. Sanjay, I saw him on the independent scene for years, and it just always baffled me that this belt always escaped him. But he got it, he held it, and it was an awesome moment when he won it, and I was like, good job. They finally gave it to the last missing piece. So now we went from controversy to a weird time. Let's take a look at this one. Yep, that's really all I can say during this time. Matt Sydal was like the transition between GFW and Impact. That's really all I can say about this title. The blue to green, green to blue. Really don't have a story behind these belts except for I really like the design. I think this is probably the best X Division design, and you'll see why in the next 2 with the red and blue versions. So here we are to the main event. My favorite design, my favorite 2. Can't really pick because even though red is my favorite color, this blue just hits a little different. I don't know if the pictures did it much justice, but I can tell you this is the second set of these belts that I own. The first set were 2mm brass. I sold them because I won this in a raffle, and while this one's being made, I got this one made too from the same maker so they could match. I know it's weird, don't judge me. It actually makes sense when you buying belts. If you know you're going to get the same belt, different color, get the same maker to make them so that way the strap won't be different. It might be black paint here, black paint there, but that's for another time. But the story behind these belts for me are, it seemed like TNA, Impact always made you pay attention to the X Division. But this was a time where people like Brian Cage and Ace Austin were like, whoa. When they held this belt, it felt like it was like the main event of the show. It felt like their storylines were so good. You can see Ace Austin, how he progresses to this devastating heel. And by the time he got to this belt, when they changed it to red, it was like him, Chris Bay, Josh Alexander, Speedball, Mike Bailey. They all just made it like, I need to see what their match is going to be. No matter what the pay-per-view was, no matter what, they were first, they were mid-card, whatever it was, I wanted to see this belt being defended. And I will have to say, even though it's a toss-up between Brian Cage and Ace Austin, without a shadow of a doubt, I think that Trey Miguel made this belt what it was. He had 2 reigns with it, and both reigns were impactful. Even when he spray painted it, he wanted you to pay attention to his matches, his gimmick. I just felt like this belt, even though Josh Alexander did a great job with it and cashed in and became world champion, but the X Division has seemed to always be almost like the Intercontinental title back in the day, where it was the first stage before you got to the world title. Yes, TNA does a great thing / Impact where they do the, I can option B, I think it's called. I might be misquoting, but everybody knows when the X Division champion can say, hey, I want to turn my belt in and I want a shot at the world title. I think it's an awesome concept. The X Division has always been a staple. It's always been a great time to watch. I can't remember too many bad X Division matches. I remember more bad World Championship matches, which is crazy. But I will say this, with Chris Sabin holding just about every version of the belt, and with AJ Styles being a forefront of it, the X Division just didn't miss. So that's why I say X marks the spot, because if you ever want to watch a good Impact, good TNA match, just find yourself an X Division match, and it can be Ultimate X, it can be for the X Division title, and of course Ultimate X, they sometimes did it with tag teams, and even did a women's one as well. But I will say this, X always marks the spot. So there you have it, why X marks the spot, story behind each belt. I'm gonna just leave you with a couple quick facts. First champion, AJ Styles, not with this belt, but the first X Division champion, AJ Styles. Chris Sabin surprisingly has 9 runs with it, and he has the most iterations of holding each belt. You got Austin Aries, who had the longest reign. Shortest reign is kind of like a tie between Eric Young, Chris Sabin, and Rockstar Spud. Frankie Kazarian was the oldest champion. Amazing Red was the youngest when he held it the first time. And Abyss was the heaviest. Rockstar Spud was the lightest. What I tell you, this belt right now, if you ever want to see a good match, just watch it. But man, if this belt isn't a beauty. So remember, every belt has a story. Can't wait to hear yours.